Okay, and we're live at OLC. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have two really interesting guests today to talk to us, Allison Salisbury and Jamila Lysicott. Both are really strong social justice folks who we're excited to hear from. We're going to start first with introductions in the on-site piece with Patrice, and then we're going to switch over to the virtual side and let everybody introduce themselves there. So Patrice, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm Patrice Brusco. I'm an instructional designer at Cornell University and the on-site buddy here at OLC Accelerate, and really excited for tonight's chat.
Hi, I'm Jamila Lysicott. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Teachers College, Columbia University. And I had the honor of being today's keynote at the OLC Accelerate conference.
Hi, I'm Allison Salisbury. I'm the Director of Higher Education at EdSurge and previously was at Davidson College with Kristen.
And I'm Michael Berman. I'm a virtually connecting buddy, advisory buddy, and I'm at Cal State Channel Islands, and it's a real privilege. It was a real privilege for me to hear Jamila. So happy to be here with her and with Allison, and to exchange tweets with Allison too.
Thanks, everybody. I'm Kristen Eshelman. I'm Director of Digital Innovation at Davidson College, and I'll be moderating this session. I'm going to turn it over to the virtual folks. Adam, do you want to go first?
Sure. Can you hear me all? Everything's good?
Yep.
All right. My name is Adam Figgles. I'm an educational developer at McGill University up here in Montreal.
Nate.
And hi, I'm Nate Angel. I've been working in open education for a while, both in the Sakai community and with Lumen Learning. I'm in Portland, Oregon today.
And Vanessa.
Unmute myself. I'm retired. I'm in Northeast, the singularly red part of Colorado, on the Great Plains. I mean, people will go, "Oh, Rocky Mountain High." I'm going to no, Heartland. Think Kansas. And I've been doing online academic labor and adjunct advocacy for some time. I was one of the four women with the one of the three women with the hashtag for National Adjunct Walkout Day. I wasn't the one who got it started, but I was drafted early, and we refer to ourselves as putting on something with just three women and a hashtag. And it went well. It was interesting. It was very informed. You know, we learned a lot. I think it was a hard experience. I think it was rather a surprise for some of them, though, because one left the country and the other dropped out of activism. So I don't know what that has to say about the project.
Well, thanks for that. I want to turn it over to, because we have a limited amount of time.
Yeah,
I want to turn it over to Jamila and Allison in particular, but Michael, I'm so glad you're there too. Really, this is a chance for you to talk about your insights from OLC, anything you want to discuss around the things that you're interested in higher ed and change. Jamila, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. So for me, being in the field of English education, it was truly an eye-opening experience to participate in a range of the workshops today, and to hear and to see and to witness. The great thing about the conference is that it's very hands-on. And so it's not just about hearing. What I see, the thing that stuck out to me, that has been sticking out to me, is the way that education is being innovated for access, and the way that we're thinking about unbundling higher education for the purpose of being accessible for people on the margins whose skill sets are often deemed, under-regarded because they don't have necessarily the stamp of a traditional college degree. And as someone who has navigated the entire school system in this country all the way up to my doctorate, I understand the way that we can misconstrue a college degree for having certain levels of proficiency that might not even be translatable to the market. So I truly have been inspired. Conference is pushing those conversations forward, and I'm thinking about it in light of English education, even, so that it's not just, you know, this is just about STEM, and we're having these divisions that are these kind of binaries that don't make sense. So this has been really powerful for me, and I'm thinking very broadly on a lot of these issues.
Yeah, Allison, thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that any higher ed conference, especially when it pulls together people whose jobs are often to think about innovation and change on their campuses, often wrestles with 3 questions. And I actually don't think there's consensus, even in this niche community, about these 3 questions. And it's, why change? Why do we even need to change in the first place? How do we change? And then how fast should we change? Michael and I were just exchanging tweets about that last question before coming into the room. And I think that the why change, for me at least, is deeply connected to the majority of learners in our post-secondary system. The fact that they're first gen, they're adults, they have children, they're working while learning. And for the most part, our system's not designed to serve them and does a very poor job in serving them. And I think if we start rooting, and increasingly I'm seeing us start to root the conversation and how we become more user-centric across a wide variety of learners, which means the how isn't one how, but many hows that sort of aligns with all the different ranges of whys. And then how fast, this is contentious, but I think Michelle, her keynote today, she advocated for very, very fast. And in part, she advocated for speed because if higher ed doesn't do it with speed, the private sector will. That's really threatening to education as a public good. But I also think that there's an even better reason for why fast, and that's because every single semester that goes by, there's an entire population of students that we are doing a disservice to, which has resulted in 36 million Americans that have debt and no degree. Social justice problem, and one that I don't think.
So I would like to ask both of you a question. So there's 2 counter narratives here. One is the need to change to serve the people who are not being served. The sort of the access argument that the current structures that we have are not serving those people. There's these underserved populations who can't access the kind of higher education the way it's been traditionally defined. And so we need to innovate to serve those people. But there's a counter narrative that says public education is expensive. We're spending all this money. It doesn't really work very well. We need to find a cheaper way to serve all the people who want public education. And so it becomes people who want to abdicate the role of the state in paying for higher education who are saying, we just need to find a cheaper way to get all those people through and get them what business wants. And this public college infrastructure is very expensive. So what we need is private industry to come in and find a way to just push people through quickly. That has the threat of creating a kind of 2-tier system where those that can afford to pay for it can have whatever kind of education that they want, and everyone else gets this kind of quick way to push you through the system, get you into a job that doesn't necessarily, that gives up a lot of what we've had in higher education. So I'm interested in your thoughts on the tension between those two and how we keep the conversation focused on it. And as you very beautifully said, Jamila, thinking about the foundations on which all this rests, which are crumbling as well, so that what we see are the cracks in higher education, but it's based on massive inequity and bias that exists in the system at every level, so that by the time you get to education, you see where it exists. So I'm just interested in how can we keep it focused on this is an opportunity to really serve people who need it versus this is a way to make some money and start a company and make a profit. So
I was gonna say
that's easy.
I mean, I started last time.
So what you're afraid of is what I've heard described as the McDonaldification of higher ed. So the fast food version. So people are hungry, let's give them hamburgers kind of thing. And that does not create, that just...
Ramen noodles.
Ramen noodles, Soylent even.
Yeah, right.
And that I don't think should be necessarily the aspiration. I do think we have a situation though where we are currently not serving those students. And a big issue is we often don't address the gravity of the problem at hand, in part because we're not incentivized to in any way. So I think step one is for higher ed to become a little more honest about the ways in which students are falling through the cracks. I think that to be profit skeptical is okay and healthy, to be allergic to any role of the private sector in helping solve this problem, I think is unproductive. It's going to take many stakeholders working together to drive that change. So I actually think that a lot of the changes we see right now happening in the corporate space that I'm most excited about are people like Guild Education, who are partnering with companies like Chipotle and then leveraging the education benefit that companies have to offer, which is $5,200 a year, to help working students get a degree. Brought in, the students can figure out how to get it funded through this benefit, and all boats rise in that scenario. And those are really positive things and things that we should be partners in higher ed rather than allergic to just because it's Guild as a for-profit company.
Yeah, so in my mind, when I think about it, it's the competency clusters, that came out, the conversation about the competency clusters in the keynote. I think it's really important that we focus on and remember how we are assessing even the rigor of those competencies, and not necessarily, it doesn't mean that it has to be a watered down experience in any capacity, but it does mean that there's an urgency to me. There's something at stake when there are millions of people who are spending their own money and stretching beyond their capacity in order to achieve social mobility, and they're just falling through the cracks. And so at the end of the day, I do believe some kind of innovation has to happen. I don't think it's always going to be neat and clean, but I think we have to try. And I think that we can still maintain that rigor if we're intentional about it. But I think that we have to like you said so well, like remain honest about what's happening currently in education. And so that's where my focus is right now. I'm still murky on my opinion in terms of the involvement of the private sector. That's something that I want to think through some more. But I do believe that at the end of the day, it is what happens is social reproduction. Just like when you think about Marxist social reproduction theory and what happens to the social reproduction of inequality if we don't make these interventions in meaningful ways, and also believe in the capacity of people to have really powerful and substantive qualities and skills to go into the market without the bias of the traditional degree that often does not mean anything. It's often just a piece of paper, and it's often an assessment of how well somebody can memorize, rote memorization. That we have to challenge a lot of these ideological issues that really sustain those injustices at the root. And I think that that's at the core of some of these tensions.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I want to make sure the folks in the virtual audience can ask a question. Adam, Nate, or Vanessa, did you want to ask anything?
Yes. I don't know if it's a question so much as a statement that I'd really like to get some comments on, but the very strong feeling among my former colleagues, basically the contingent faculty, the non-tenured faculty, is that too many of the savings that cutting the cost of higher education is also going to be done on their backs. Basically, it's like, oh, well, we've got this cheap labor pool, and it's extremely unfair. But at the other hand, at the same time, I've seen the entry-level students that weren't really ready, struggling and adding up debt, and we need more than we're getting, both students and faculty. At some point, there's still a pool now, a good pool of available faculty, but they're burning out fast, and so it's not being replenished. More and more are not going on with they're leaving, or they're not going into teaching.
Yeah, that's a good point that I was thinking about earlier this week around the relationship between teaching and learning, right? It's not just a student issue. I mean, students are not going to be empowered if faculty are increasingly not empowered either. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, casual labor, contingent labor, where does that play into the social justice equation? And that's for Allison and Jamila.
Oh, so yeah, I'm just nodding my head because I'm like, this is very a very crucial layer. So on the side of someone who has served as adjunct faculty and also who has spent a lot of money as a student, definitely feel this tension because, well, on the same token, you know, the alternative is that, so we are going to ask people to stay within these traditional routes and spend an absurd amount of money that they don't have so that we can support the faculty. And it's like there's, you know, if we think about it in these two ways, and to me, it's very, very limited. I really do think that we need to get back to the drawing board. Like, we need to get back to the drawing board and just what we have in place right now, because if the salary of the faculty is contingent on the abuse of the students, this is just a terrible dynamic, and it's toxic. And so I think that this is something that we need to come to the drawing board in a really honest and authentic way and think about, how do we interrogate this and rebuild something that is far more equitable and just for all of the parties involved.
I completely agree. And I think at the core of that is this notion that, you know, you can't just like slicing away pieces of our current model and hoping it gets cheaper and more efficient while maintaining whatever it does right now.
Exactly.
And given that we have huge structural problems around equity, access, quality, and affordability, like that to me requires a completely rethinking. And K-12 has some of this going on right now. K-12 has a whole sort of surgence of work that's happening right now, in part supported by philanthropy, in part by the private sector, and in part by the public sector, in rethinking school models. This is like a whole body of work, is saying what are new school models that ask fundamentally different questions about sort of when students learn, what they learn, who they learn it from, and what they do with that learning. Even reimagining sort of what it means to have a course. The sort of modular 4 courses a semester, each taught by a different faculty who maybe teaches that course once every other year. Like, those are all inherited structures that maybe don't make sense at all anymore.
Right.
And so I would love to see us start investing, institutions investing. I would love to see the government, like with First in the World grants, investing, philanthropy investing in the experimental, and with the experimentation of fundamentally new models. Some of the barriers there are accreditation and funding in particular. And so you see the DOE doing things like EQUIP, which is an experimental site to say what would it look like to try out fundamentally new models. And it's been really unpopular from a lot of higher ed people because it smells of privatization. But if people actually start thinking about it as experimentation of new models and start to own it as a space where they can do that, then that could be a potentially interesting pathway to go forward.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to make sure that Nate and Adam could chime in if they'd like.
Yeah, I have two sort of questions, I guess. One of them is the sort of tension that is really like the purpose of higher ed. There is a very clear tension between we're trying to make you a better person versus we're trying to get you a job. And I think there's a real question where when you go down the route, and I think this is where some of the danger is, when you go down the route of higher ed as a job training, or the purpose of higher ed is to get you a job, I think you have a lot of different tensions. I think you have a lot of different market pulls. You have a lot of different things that are driving it. And I think there is that tension between the idea of higher ed is there to sort of make you a better human versus higher ed is designed to get you a job that you will then go do other things in life with. And the second thing was that the value proposition of higher ed, I think, is an issue that is very, very central to the core of what are some of the big issues in the United States. However, the value proposition of higher ed, meaning that students are graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and higher ed is an incredibly horribly expensive thing to do, is less of an issue outside of the United States. And so I just wanted to point out that when you start looking at Canada, you start looking at Europe, you start looking at Australia and elsewhere, this idea that students graduate with $250,000 in debt is a very, very foreign concept.
Can I say, so I just wanted to respond to that, because in my work, it's always important for me to think about the intersection of race, class, and culture as we have these conversations. And so I know when it comes to the working class, when it comes to working class communities, when it comes to communities of color in particular, that especially when you exist in both of those intersections, that the idea that higher ed is supposed to get you a job is something that's very urgent and pressing. And it's something that has been sold as a meritocratic idea, that there's this idea that if you have access, tangible access to social mobility through this medium, and it's often very much a lie. It's often very much a very way more complicated, corrupt, and as we're just, we're speaking about in this space, like it's layered. And so just in response to that and thinking about, I was thinking to myself, well, it depends on the audience, right? What groups are being told that this is meant to make you better versus the urgency of I need to get a job and I need to use this as some sort of escape from my class conditions or from other constraints in our society that limit that kind of mobility and financial access and freedom. And so I think that's an important layer for us to take into regard in relation to what you're saying.
And I started out talking about the why, and for me, the why is that increasingly students have many different aspirations, backgrounds, motivations for participating in post-secondary. And post-secondary is a lot of different things. It is not one thing. It's not 4-year residential full-time programs. It's so many different things. And so I think it is a very privileged statement that higher ed always has to be something. And I think that can lead to a really paternalistic view on sort of what system we believe all citizens should go through. And instead, I think we should, again, take the sort of a user-centered approach and asking people why they're there afterwards, and then figure out the way that we design sort of differentiated experiences that reflect the differentiated aspirations of learners. I think on a more meta level, especially as we live in a world where people do change jobs so many different times and skills become quickly outmoded or completely replaced by technology, there is some notion that part of what it means to provide education as a public good is to educate a citizenship to sort of collectively govern, and to be able to move sort of throughout their lifetime and hold many different kinds of jobs. And I think in that way, we should probably ask, what does it look like? What do the core competencies look like if we want to prepare students for sort of a lifetime of work or a lifetime of learning and not just their first job? But I don't actually think these two things are in direct opposition to one another. I think you can teach creativity, critical thinking, social emotional intelligence while you also teach coding, management, sales. I don't think that these things have to be so polarized.
Yeah, I agree, Allison. Nate, did you want to say anything before we sign off? I'm sensitive to their time, and I'm guessing you guys want to head to dinner.
I know that's okay. I've just been listening in. My voice is a little hoarse too, so I can barely talk.
Okay, great. Well, so any closing remarks, anything you guys want to say to wrap it up?
Thank you.
No, I think this is a great lead-in for tomorrow morning's keynote with Stephen at Minerva. And for those that missed it, we had a V-Connecting session with him earlier today. That was really great. And I encourage you to watch the recording because it really complements nicely what we've been talking about here.
Yeah, thanks, Patrice. Allison, Jamila, Michael, Patrice, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for being on virtually. And
Thank you very much.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye, guys.